Good morning. Kumlena Blat Gemoda. Today's daf is daf Nun Dalut. We are up to the bottom of the page. We're up to about 5 lines, Nun Gimel Beis, 5 lines to the bottom of the page. So in the Mishnah, we talked about that a mincha has to be made, it has to be like matzah, except there's two exceptions. Otherwise, they all have to be like matzah. And Ameir says what you do is you take a little bit, you measure in the yisaron in the special measuring cup, daf nun dalud, gimel and beis at the bottom of the page. And you use a special, you put the flour in the measuring cup, and then you take a little bit of flour out, you put some flour out, you put some water, and you mix it together, and then you put it, and then you sort of put it back in, and it ferments the entire amount to become a matzah. Rabbi Yehuda says it's too little, it's not really going to be effective, it's not going to cover the entire amount. So he says you take a bit out, let it sit out for a while, let it turn into much stronger sourdough, and then you put it back into the thing, and it turns holding your chametz. And Rameir says back to the counters, that's no good. Why is that no good? Because by you take the flour out and you water, it depends. If you put a little bit of water in, it becomes very, very dense. So now, when you put it into the measure cup to measure, it is less flour than originally would have been, and therefore you're going to be adding more flour into the cup. It's more than the yisaron. If you put a lot of water in there, so then it expands. And again, had it been real flour, only flour, it would have been less. But now that it's a lot of water in, it's more, it expands. And you're putting less flour into the sudden, you're not having a full measure. So neither are happy with what each one does. Says the Gemara, that from Gimel and Bey, we're talking about Menachos Daf is the 5 lines at the bottom. Meir says, you take the sourdough from itself, a machmitzah, and you put it back in and let it ferment the entire stock. My chaseda, you say that, and Rabbi Yehuda said that you take out some and let it sit for a while. You have to put it back in the same day, otherwise it's leaner. Sit for a while and so it turns to real sourdough and you put it back in. And they told him it's missing, it'll be missing or it'll be extra. So now the Gemara will explain what I just explained to you. What does it mean less or more? If it's dense, because you put only a little bit of water in there, had it been flour, it had been more flour. Now that it's dense and you put it into this measuring cup, you're going to have to add more flour into the cup to make up for the fact that there's a little piece that is dense. And it's less than it should be. Nimtzas Yiseda, you're having extra flour. Midas Yisaron, you're having extra flour than Midas Yisaron. Raka, if it's tender, you put a lot of water in there, so then it expands. That means you're putting less flour in the cup. Nimtzas Cheseda. So who cares? You tell me, but look at it, what it was like had it been real flour. Who cares? But you're measuring it right now. And right now, this is the state. This has either a lot of water, this pit, or has a little bit of water. Who cares? Right now, this is a full measure in the cup of Yisrael, and that's it. You measure the height of Yisrael. Both Rabbi and Rabbi say you don't look at the measure weights now. You look at this way it was in its original state. Original state is flour. As flour, it would have taken up this much volume, but now because you added a lot of water, it's taking up too much volume. A little water, it became dense, taking up less volume. And therefore, you're going to have to compensate by either adding more flour or other, into this measuring cup, or less flour. You're not getting the accurate. Why don't we just why don't we take a little piece from it? Let it sit outside, and put it in a warm place, or put it into already an existing sourdough. Put a little piece in there until this piece becomes proper sourdough, and then and then you put it back in. And you will need it together with the rest of the stuff. In other words, why don't you measure the cup first? A whole yisaron of flour. Do that. And then afterwards take out some of the flour. Your whole problem with midach you say that because because you're going to measure now with this thing in it, and we have a problem. Measure pure flour. And then in the morning, then take a scoop out and get it to become hummus, this little piece of sourdough, by putting in a warm thing or something, accelerate the process, and then put it back in. And now we don't care if it goes up or down. If you had to, if it doesn't take up as much or it does take more, because you already used Makadosh in the keli before when it was in the original state of flour. Then you lose it, and then we need it together. It's simple. So measure the cup flour first, and then do that. And we're scared that if people see that you're bringing something in afterwards and you don't measure it again, they'll think, that's how you normally do a mincha. They don't realize that you measured already before and everything was done properly. Exactly. People think you just bring in from the outside, a piece of yeast, a sourdough, whatever. What have we learned? Ein machmitzin betapuchi means you have to make it into matzah, but don't use apple juice. Use water. Don't use apple juice. And they say machmitzin, yes, juice. May paytas is machmitz. Av Kahana, Masla Rabchina said it wasn't Chanina ben Gamliel, Chanina Metragid. Now what? There's an argument whether may paytas you need to make it chametz, that the lach may teide or the lach may the lechem. So one opinion says you don't have to use water, you can use fruit juice, and one opinion says you cannot use fruit juice. Says the Gemara, oh, you very much so. Talking about a myth. According to who does it go? We learn tapuach. If you take an apple, sheliskut, you ground it up. The nasna beteiche isa. You took an apple of truma and you put it into a piece of dough of chuli. Now that usually we say it's bottled in 100 times, but there are certain things that we say that never becomes bottled. One is a catalyst, something that makes exactly something a catalyst that makes things happen is never bottled. Like rennet and cheese doesn't matter that it's less than 1 in 100 because it has an effect there. Over here also, if this is going to cause it to ferment, then the whole thing will become truma. It's not going to become bottled. So it says here, if you take a taposh, it's given up the chiza, it's not bottled. So it's clear to me what that fruit juice is machmitz. Man, and not the chachamim. True, fruit juice does not make chametz gomer, but it makes it chametz nuksha, hard chametz, which midrabanan is also. Yeah, midrabanan midraisa. And chametz nuksha is then dry, hard, tough. It's not that edible. Not that edible. Now, in Halach and Pesach, egg matzahs, for example. So the big machlekes in the poskim is a long case here. You can see, and machlekes as follows. Because in the Gemara and Pesachim, we had a machlekes about Rabba that made paytas a machmitz or not. And Rabba clearly says it's not machmitz. So and now our Gemara, when you come to Rabba, you can use eggs and make egg matzahs, no problem. Pesach comes along our Gemara here and says, but min nuksha have it. It's still also in Rabbanon. What's going on here? Big machlekes in poskim how to learn, but the general way we follow is that may paytas on its own is not machmitz. In other words, if you just have eggs with flour, no problem. If you add a little water to the may paytas, then it becomes chametz nuksha. And some say if you add water, not only does it become nuksha, but it accelerates the process. We know 18 minutes, but at the moment you put a little bit of water, it makes it a lot quicker. We're not even sure how long it takes. That's why we don't eat egg matzahs on Pesach, even if it's only egg, because the slightest amount of water, we don't know how much water either, the slightest amount of water accelerates the process, and we sit there and we have a measure of 18 minutes, as long as you finish from beginning to end, 18 minutes, not chametz. But we don't know what the timetable is for may pay a little bit of water. That is why only for cholim, only for sick people do we say they're allowed to have. Yeah, and Besed also said that. The Besed Pascha made pay say machmitz. But if you add water to it, it is machmitz or it's nuksha. And so you have to reconcile the two gemaras. Between the two gemaras, we get that addition about water. Says Gemara further. The most difficult kind of kmitza for a kohen is the mincha of a sinner where there's no liquid there. If there's no liquid, you know how hard it is. It's only flour to keep it without falling out. And you put a liquid, it keeps it all together, it's stuck together, so it's easy to put between your fingers. But there's no liquid there. You put it in your fingers, flour keeps falling out from all over the place, and you clean with your thumb. Says the Gemara, that's one opinion. No. Okay, you can't put oil in there, but you can put a little water in there to make it a bit thicker so that it doesn't fall off. So lame, what's the machlekes? That the machlekes is, one of them says that the way they are, what do you call it? One of them holds that the way they are, you're mishayed, the way they are right now. And therefore, you can't have... In other words, Rabbi Yitzchak holds. One of them holds that you measure it the way it is right now. Well, you put the water in, and now you measure it, and that's it. You can do kmitza. The other one says no. You look at it the way it was earlier, with earlier flour, and therefore you can't add water because earlier flour doesn't have any water. So again, Masaber Kamoshe Mishai the way was a Chatchila. Masaber Abizka calls Kamoshe Hoya Mishai. That's right. Abizka calls Kamoshe Hain the way they are now. And because the way they are now, it's a good kaimitz. There's water now. It is right now. It's good. However, Rabbi Eiler says you have to look at it as if it was flour in the original state. And now the problem is by adding water, you added to the amount, or you took off, depending on how much water you put in. Saying it before. That's the argument whether you can have water there or not. So no. No problem. You look at it right. You measure right now the kmitza, and there's water in this. So what? You look at it right now. You filled up your 3 fingers. Good enough. But Abela holds. You look at it. What it was. Lechatchila was flour, and therefore you need. And now that you added water, how you made it dense, so you made it too expansive and too much water. And neither one, you're not going to have the full share, that proper kmitza, because you have something in there that belongs there. Well, no. Everyone agrees that you do the way it was originally. Everyone looks at the way it was originally. So what's the machlekes then? Sorry, way down now. Sorry, the way you are now. So therefore, the way it is good. So what's the machlekes? So why is Rabbi able to say that it's possible? He holds that Rabbi Yitzchak calls the only thing you shouldn't have there is oil, and water is permitted, and the shear is not a problem, and water is not a problem. Well, the other one says shear is not a problem because you look at the ways now. But nevertheless, when it says chareva, it means no liquid whatsoever, and you just added water, it's a problem. Yeah. So the Gemara here concludes: you look at it the way it's now. Tanahas we learned. We'll continue on this theme. Tanahas we learned over there. Psada egel. Let's say that if you have meat from a young calf, shenitbach, that started out less than the size of an egg, so it cannot generate tumor, and now it expanded, swelled, and now it's the size of a beya.
You left it out.
Oh, liquid came in there, whatever it is. So now it's the size of a beya. Also, meat generally swells. It swells on its own over time. Or bus is a kana that you have an older cow. Shenismaich, it shrunk, and it started out being a beya. Now it shrunk. It says the mishtai the way they shehain. Now shehain can mean the way they are, the way they were. Samachlekes. What exactly the Baraisa means? Rav Chia and Rabbi Yecha, they all say mishtayim. We judge k'may shehain. We judge them the way they are right now. So therefore, I don't care that the basar of the calf started out less than a beya. Now it's a beya. It's matame. I don't care the basar of the zakena started out as a beya. Now it's less. It's not matame. You look at the ways right now, and look at the way we're learning right now. That this is mahatayid. You look at the ways right now, and Shmuel and Rab Shimon ben Nebi and Reish Lakish, Amri, they say mishtayim k'may shehayu. They say that you look at it the way it was, and therefore the basar egel was not a beya, it's not metame, and the basar kena was a beya, even though right now it's shriveled, it is still metame. Look at the way it was.
Anytime, or when the person touched it.
When you touched it, it was less than a beya, but this thing intrinsically should be a beya. So they hold the way it was, and they hold the way it is. Make us a question of those who hold the way it was. It says, the meat of the egel did not have a beya the size of an egg, so it does not generate tumor. Then with tavfach, it swelled. But now that it is a shear, so the din is toil l'shaver. Anything that happened in the past, because it was less than an egg, is toil, obviously. Clearly, it says that now that it's swelled, we don't say, oh, look at what it was. Look at it now. Now it's a beya. It generates tumor, transmits tumor. Says the Gemara, there's a shlakish will answer midrabanan. That's only midrabanan. But Mahatayra, you look at the way it was, not the way it is. If anybody saw him a sefer, look at the sefer. If you're talking about midrabanan, it says v'chei bepigul, v'chei benoiser, that it started out less than a kazayis, and now it's a kazayis. If you eat it, the noiser, the leftover of an animal beyond his dime, you get chorus. But it's only the Rabbanan, where does Koros come in? Yeah, I'm talking about ice. If you're talking about what that, you look at it the way it's now. So you ate a kazayis of noiser now. I don't care when it started out with less kazayis. And you can pick up a nice. I live in Rabbanan, pickle noiser, Rabbanan, Mika, where do you find the Rabbanan pickle noiser? Ema, we're talking about eating pickle noiser. We're talking about the chein betumas pickle. The chein betumas noiser. But the Rabbanan, the din is that noiser and pickle, even though it never contacted any tumor from an outside source, the Rabbanan laid on the Easter of Tumah. This is to make the Kohanim more careful. They should make sure, because they don't want to become Tumah, make sure that there's no leftovers. So that's only Midrabbanan. and you need a shear. And that's what he's saying here is that we look here, the Rabbanon, we look at the waist now. I would have thought the whole din is the Rabbanon. So coolly high. Remember this type of cloud we look at the ways now is the Rabbanon. This that a pigul or noisa generate tum is the Rabbanon. It's like a double the Rabbanon. We would have thought that far we wouldn't go and say if it started on less than egg and now kazayis now it's kazayis the Rabbanon going to say that one that generates tumah. That they do. No eye one way or another. Okay, I'll bring another eye and we're going to repudiate what Shmuel and the Shlokish of Shimon Rabbi said. Toshma coming here. Boss is a kana. An older animal shall have a shear, start out the proper shear. Samak and it shriveled. Pachas make a shear is tummy l'shavar. If you touched it while it was the full size, the full shear is tummy. Oh, but the time I can't have it's clearly here that when it shrunk, it's tied. You look at the way it is now. You look at the way it's now. A kash on them. Amar Rabba. So Rabba now says the following: Kol heicha de mikara havadei. The hashlam, if it's a case of shriveling, it started out the full shear, and now it became less than a shear. Look at it now. The fact is you don't have the size of a kazayas or the size of a beya, so therefore there's nothing to talk about. Then if it shrinks, we look at it now. If it started out less than the shear, the hash to have a beya, now there is midrabanan. No, before we said that it's mahatoida. Look at the way it is right now. That's how we understood it's mahatoida. Now we're saying it's only midrabanan. Why is it midrabanan? No, so Rashi says because how did it swell? Because water went into it, liquids, and so therefore the meat itself still is less than the shear. So mahatayda, we look at the meat. The meat itself is still less than the shear. Why is it? Why did it now swell to in volume to the size of a shear? Because it has some water, it absorbs water. That mahatayda doesn't make it a shear, but midrabanan is also. So if it shrinks, definitely look at it right now. It doesn't talk about it. Not matter number the bone, so it's hard. If it's well, but the bone it's us. Keep pligi. So one is arguing. Interesting thing. So what's the machlekes then between the Rav and Shmuel and the Shlokish and Reichen? Keep pligi. It had the shear, bit samak, and it shrunk. And you say if it shrunk, you look at it now. There's no tumor anymore. But then he said before the chaz of a tafa. Now, if it originally was a kazayis or originally was a beya, let's say a beya for tumor, then it's tummy mahatayda. If it originally was less than a beya and it swelled to a beya, it's only midrabanan. What happened with a beya? It shrunk, and you said it shrunk. That's it. There's no longer beya, and then it went back to its original state. Do we say it went back to the original state? It's back to mahatoida, or do we say no? Once you doich it's uis. Now it's only midrabanan like any other case that swelled. That's the machlekes. Because you have a geshir, it's samak and it shrunk, and then the chaz of a tavach, and then it swelled up again. True, the liquid's there, but did it regenerate what originally was? You rejected the original. This is a whole new thing now. There's only Rabbanan. There's no dicha. So that's the machlekes. How can there be any opinion that says there's dicha b'isurin? But now, didn't we learn what happens? Kibeya oichlin. Let's say you have the size of an egg of food, which generates tumah, transmits tumah. You place it in the sun, v'nismatu, and it shriveled, it shrunk. Okay, and everyone agrees now that it shrunk, it's no longer matami. So that's as far as tumah is concerned. Or v'chein kazayis min hameis, kazayis min hanavelu, kadoshim min hasheretz, which is all cases of tumah there again, and it shrunk. Or kazayis pigul, kazayis noisa, or kazayis chay, which you eat, right, which is also, but they all shrunk and tied. And if it's tumah, it's tar, and if it's a case of chiyav karis, there's no chiyav karis. Oh, but he nicham big shamim. Afterwards, you placed it in the rain. So now it came back. So that's your argument. V'tavchu, and it swelled up. Tameyin v'chayovin alem shepigel v'nois goes back to the original. Yeah, that I said. Pigel nois is mahatoida. Otherwise, there's no such thing as kodesh miravon. So you have to the man the oma yesh dicha b'surin. You have to itaka repudiate. Yeah.
That's how long ago? We just mentioned Commander Omar.
Well, you're right.
Normally a tuvta, you say tuvta to whoever.
Yeah, but it's too many names, 3 names. It's a Shloki, Shmuel, Shimberebi, too many. Toshma, says the Gemara, let's continue. Sorry?
Is this because we said about the expansion and the shrinking?
So, no, as we said like this, the way we have like that. Rabba came along and said, because now we'll continue with Rabba. Rabba came along and said, if it shrivels, you look at it as today. It's no longer the shear. We don't care about what happened before. And if it increases, then we say it's only midrabanan because of the water that's inside. And then we came up with this whole machlekes, if it's nitche or not nitche. So now I'm going to ask a question of Rabbi. You say for shrivels. Now, when you give truma, there's different ways of giving truma. One way of giving truma is or meiser. You give it according to the number. You have 100 bushels, you give 10 bushels to the Levi, and you have 90. Or you give it by the volume. You have 100 kavin measures. You give 10 kavins. What happens where the number comes out to be more than the volume, or the volume comes out to be more than the number? We'll see how that's possible. Then you should go whichever is higher. Says this like this: you have figs, you have te'anim figs, and then you have dried figs, a groigrus. A dried fig, Rashi explains, is less than half the size of like a dehydrated fruit. You see, it's less than half the size. Can you give, let's say, ma'aser from a dried fig on regular figs? Or you could, but how many? If you go by the number and you give dried figs, 10 dried figs for 90, and keep 90 fresh figs, the number. If you'd have given that, you're not giving enough. You're not giving enough. If you're giving 10 fresh figs for 90, against 90 dried figs, then you're giving too much. Now, what's wrong with giving too much? What's wrong with giving too much is even though the mice is a valid mice, because in there there's valid mice, but part of that is not valid mice, right? Because it's too much. And the part that's not valid mice, you didn't give mice on that. Comes out that you have mixed in there tevel of something that, and therefore that you can't eat any of that. It's you macalculate. So the price is as follows: Termin te'enim ala gregor. If you want to give truma, so you want to give truma of te'enim, which are moist and bigger, we're talking about ma'aser, by the way, because we're talking about numbers of 10. Termin te'enim ala gregor is b'minyan. We'll soon see. Is you go by the number. Here you go by the number. That's what he says. Now the question is, being go by the number, you're giving too much. So there's only one possible conclusion. We look at the gregors not at its current state, the way it shrunk. We look at what it was. It also used to be fresh figs. So clearly, Kasha Rabba, you Rabba said we look at if it shrivels. We look at it today. He was looking at how it was yesterday. So when I ask the question, you look at you go by the number. Now, we look at things the way it was. Then shop it. Makes sense. Why? Because the dried figs used to be normal figs. The way they are right now. So now so these you have shriveled ones. So therefore 90 dried figs is really like 180, or 10 fresh figs is like 20 dried figs. So even too much. And what's wrong? And now we learned we learned that hamar b'mais is if somebody gives it's the price Tanya. Hamar b'mais is pay mesukanim. You fix the effect because included in that generous mice you gave, definitely there is the correct mice. Or b'masay but the mice itself, nobody can eat it because you have too much. So Gemara adds back.
We say that I'm giving meiser and whatever is extra will be nadava.
But you have to give mice on that. Problem is you didn't give mice on those extra. So you have to then separate somewhere else for that. But you haven't done that. You have to then give more mice on the top of that. Yeah, because everything has to. The entire tour needs either to be the mice or to be give mice.
Give 11 to
whatever you have to give. You work. So you have if it's 100, you got to give 10. If you no, he's not. He's giving for 100. He's giving 20. So he took 10 extra. And where's the mice on that 10 extra? It's like it's tantamount to giving 10 extra because it's much bigger. So what are you saying? So what do you want to prove from here? We look at the way it was. Okay, that's your question. Aim was safe. We'll look at the next case. So we'll look at the way it was, yeah? The next case is Gregor, but the Braisa says if you're giving Gregors, the dried ones, ala te'enim on the te'enim. Now, b'mida. You go according to the volume. You don't say you don't go the number. What do you go? You give me dried figs on the fresh figs. So you don't give the number. You give volume, which means if this is 10 kavin, you got to give one kav. And one kav might not be. Let's say there's 190 tainim, might be a lot more than 10, maybe 20. Now, if you can tell me the way they are now, then shopper makes sense. Look the way right now, you can't give 10 Gregors for the 90 tainim because it'll be too little. Eli Amri Hain, you're going to tell me that what? That you're going to do it the way it was. You can tell me the way it was. So what are you doing? You tell me to give one kav of dried figs for 9 tavim of wet fig. But if you tell me that dried figs, we look at him as if the way it was, which a fresh fig, suddenly you're giving too much. You're giving that because 1 kav to 9 is like double. Yeah, is it? Is giving too much. Same problem. So you know what? Elahacha betruma g'deilos. We're not talking about ma'aser. We're talking about truma. And what's the advantage of truma? Truma, you're allowed to be generous. It doesn't mention here numbers. It just says whether you use a number or you go by volume or you go by the amount. We're talking about truma g'deilos. In every case, we're saying be generous, and not by truma. There's no limit. There's no, you're allowed to be just like mahatoida chita achas poteres akeri. You can do one little kernel, but you can give more also, and therefore you give more. That's no problem. What do you tell me? And it's no problem at all. But and each way we're telling you the best method to be more generous. Says the Gemara, if so. He must say, look at that. The son of Rabbi said, Abba, my father, he would take 10 dried figs. Shimon Makchoya Rashi says, it's interesting here to remember. Rashi Makchoya is the name of the vessel where they put the figs to dry. And that's why Rashi says throughout Shas, we call dried figs Ktias. Why is it called Ktias? Al Shem HaKli. That's why it's called Ktias, dried figs. So he would take 10 gregors from the Makchoya. There were 90 figs. Now he says clearly a number, 10 for 90. We're not talking about truma. Truma, you do 2%. You know, whether you can be a bit more generous, but then you have a choice of number or volume, so you can do volume, but it's still 2%. Here he's giving 10 for 90, which is clearly meiser. What kind of 10 is there? Ella's what it says. You know what? We're talking about trumas meiser askinen. We're talking about truma, so you can be generous. But when a Levi receives a 10% meiser from you, they have to give now 10% to a coin. That's where 10% comes. But it has the same din as truma. You're allowed to be generous, and that's what we're talking about over here. So Abba Elazar ben Goimalu. And what does he say? The Tanya, he learned, it says the pasuk, I will consider it a truma, or the Levi has to give truma, the end of pasuk. It says trumaschem plural. B'shtei trumas hakosim medaber. There are 2 kinds of trumas, and there are many dinim respects are the same. Achas truma gdoila, whatever Yid has to give truma from his farm, and ba'achas trumas meiser. And then the Levi has to give truma from his meiser. And kishem truma gdoil and tell by me, you can just assess. You don't have to stand there physically and mamash count. You can just look at it and say, oh, this looks like 2%, whatever. And the moment you think that you designate a certain area, that becomes truma. Even though you still have to separate it, but that area now becomes truma. Kach truma is meiser, the same thing. You tell by me, you can assess. And then we continue. Ma truma gdoile ba'ayin yofa, you're allowed to be generous. After meiser ba'ayin yofa. So that's what you're saying. That my father was always generous. He did. If he did proper figs on dry one, he would use a method where he would be a bit more generous. And if he did dried figs on wet one, he'd do a method that would be more generous. Now goes to our question. We know from here we have a question. Oh, but what Rabbi Elazar to say? He would take 10 dried figs. He took 10 dried figs on 90 on the kalkola, on the basket. Fresh ones. How can he do that? Unless we look at the grade the way it was. You, Rabbi, said that when it shrivels, we look at it the way it's now. Here, we're using gregris to give meiser against fresh figs, and 10 versus only 10. And the only possible explanation is because we look at it the way it was. And the gregris used to be a fresh fig. Kasha, Rabbi. We look at the way it's now. It makes sense. Why? 10 gregis is good. Yeah, if you tell me the way you look the way it was, then batzalu. Then you're not giving enough because that was dried figs. Figs is different. Shiny gregis. Everywhere else we say if it shrunk, a piece of meat shrunk, we look at the way it's right now. Less than the size of an egg, less right now. But dried figs, since it's so easy to restore it, you can just cook it up. Yeah, okay, and you bring it back to its original state. It's so easy. It's as if it never lost its original state, and that's why the rabbis made it that we treat it the way it was because it's so easy to put it back in that situation. We'll stop here. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, at 9:15.